Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Caroline Colas, and I am the Senior Director of Fitness and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Today on our Positive Psychology Hour, our Lunch and Learn will be an interview with Sonya Tinsley Hook. We're going to be talking about accessing your strength to stay energized and in the game. No matter the outcome of the 2020 US election, our quest to build a society that is just, kind, inclusive, and equitable must continue. But how do we find and maintain the energy and hope that we need to stay in the game and keep moving forward, especially when the positive change we seek sometimes seems highly unlikely or even impossible? Sonya believes that the answer lies in a few very powerful ideas, such as picking your team, finding your position, playing to your strength, and something she calls strengths keeping for common good. Today, we will going to be talking about the positive psychology research and the practices from the VIA Character Strengths Assessment to help us strengthen ourselves and one another during these challenging times. Sonya Tinsley Hook is a coach with a passion for helping people know, grow, and show their own strengths. As a founder of the All Our Strengths Project, Sonya's mission is to teach people how to become strengths keepers in their own schools, their own families, communities, and organizations so that everyone's strengths can be nurtured and people can work together more effectively. Sonya also helps people understand how to use their VIA character strengths to take on difficult challenges like the one we're in today. To take these challenges on together and come together across ideological divides and confronting systemic racism as well. Sonya has a bachelor's degree in English, a master's degree in psychology, and leadership coaching. She has been featured in Paul Loeb's classic books on citizenship and civic engagement, The Soul of a Citizen, Living with Conviction in Cynical Times, and The Impossible Will, Take a Little While, A Citizen's Guide to Hope in a Time of Fear. And that is what we're going to talk about today, hope in a time of fear. Welcome to the call, Sonya. Thank you so much for being with us at this critical time.
Thank you for having me. And I hope I did not imply that I know how to fix everything. It's like, oops.
No, not at all. I think that, we've never been here before,
Mm,
right?
so true.
And
So true.
I
Our,
don't think there's an expectation that anyone knows how to fix
our
this.
word for 2020, unprecedented, right?
Yes, I've been hearing that a lot. So
Yeah.
remind everybody how you know or affiliated or just came across the Whole Being Institute. They've been our partner in this series and they've just been incredible.
Well, I have relied on you for the positive information that you put out into the world about positive psychology, about strengths, about whole being. And so I have just been someone who has enjoyed the light that you all put out into the world, and also through being very passionate about VIA character strengths myself, and ha- you know, um, spoke earlier this year on a VIA United in Strengths call, and then had the opportunity to present for you all as well. So I'm just glad to be here again.
Yeah, I'm just taking off my earring because I think it's gonna interfere with some of the sound. Let you guys let me know if you can't hear me
Sure.
or if there's any interference or anything like that. Yeah, I really enjoyed your last presentation, and you introduced to us this idea of strengths keeping, and I'm so excited to return to it. And it makes so much sense to me to take this time period and to say, wait a second, maybe I can lean into my strengths right now, which I,
Absolutely.
which is what I think you're going to talk about.
That is. So why don't we jump right in?
Great.
And
Go ahead and share your screen.
I will do my best to share my screen. Okay, and get to the right slide. There we go. Whoops, I'm not from beginning. There we go. So, accessing your strengths to stay in the game. And we're going to talk a little bit today about what that even means. What is the game? And I will go ahead and put out there as a disclaimer, my daughter's actually an athlete. She's a competitive swimmer. She's 14 and loves all sports. And I'm the kind of person where my sport was reading bowl, things like and so there is some heavy irony here that I'm leaning into this game and athletic and team metaphor so much, but I think it works, and so we'll go with it. So you
And
already mentioned the All Our Strengths project, and I just put this slide here because I love it, which is what you see when you go to the All Our Strengths website. The world needs all our strengths, and that is what I believe. That is what I try to shape my work in my life around, this idea that we all have strengths. When I talk about strengths, I am talking about those positive ways we think, feel, and behave, our inner qualities, the inner resources that each of us has inside to not only cultivate well-being, but to handle adversity, to do hard things. Our strengths are literally our strengths, our inner toolbox. And of course, the set of strengths there.
Sonia, did you want to I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did you want to go on to slideshow? Because we're seeing,
Oh,
I know you
sure.
wanted that.
Oh, sorry. Let me do
Oh,
that.
that's
Sorry,
okay.
folks.
No, I just know you wanted that. So
Yeah.
thank
So
you, though.
title slide, and we don't need to see a picture of me. I'm not sure. This is the slide I was talking about. The world needs all our strengths. And so, but when I use the word strengths, and there are actually more strengths than we could name, right? There are infinite ways we can describe the strengths that human beings have. But I'm speaking specifically today about the VIA character strengths, the ones up on the screen. And just to level set, I'm sure many people on this call, some of you are very familiar with this set of 24 strengths. And then for some of you, this might be the first time that you're hearing about them. And so this assessment that you can find at viacharacter.org is just, in my opinion, one of the most wonderful tools that we have as Team Humanity. Each of us has some combination of these 24 strengths. Every single human being uses all of these strengths to some degree. These are the ways we are at our best with one another. You see qualities here such as kindness, creativity, leadership, honesty, bravery, just so many things that are important. So what's beautiful about these strengths, they were developed by a team of leading social scientists, psychology researchers, because they were trying to answer the question about what's good in human beings. Are there some universal qualities that no matter where you go, these are the qualities that people look for in one another. These are the qualities that we want our children to have. These are the qualities that we look for in our leaders. This is what we mean when we are asking, trying to see the good in each other and be our best. And so through their research, they came out with this list of 24 strengths. And what's beautiful about taking the VIA Character Strengths Survey is that when you take the survey, and it takes about 10 minutes, and it's available for free. There's a youth version. It's available in multiple languages. But within about 10 minutes, you get a list of how these 24 strengths show up in you. Because each of us, even though we have all 24 strengths, we also have about 5 to 7 of these strengths that are really our signature strengths. They are how we show up naturally, the ones that people see in us most consistently. So for instance, maybe all of us, no, maybe it's a fact, all of us are funny sometimes, but if humor is one of your signature strengths, then it's very likely that you're bringing that humor into most situations that you're in. People are probably describing you as funny, or just seeing in you that ability to make people smile or to bring some lightness into situations. So again, we all have the all 24 of these, but there are 5 to 7 in particular that are really going to be your signature strengths. What's amazing, there's a figure I love to share. There are over 600 sextillion possible constellations of these 24 strengths. And that, I have to write this down because I was an English major. 600, that's the number 600 followed by 21 zeros. So that is how unique our particular constellation of strengths are. There are that many constellations, that many different ways that these strengths can align in human beings. And so when you take the time to take this assessment and really think about your character strengths and look for ways to use them, you're really finding out something pretty important and unique about yourself. Or if you're doing this with your family or colleagues, this is giving you very important information, because when we use our signature strengths, that's where we're more energized. That's when people appreciate our signature strengths, we feel valued, we feel understood, we feel connected, and a sense of belonging. So there's really so much to be gained from knowing your own strengths, and then also recognizing strengths in the people around you. So I'm going to step back from talking about strengths just for a minute to let you know where this idea of teaming, or being a team, picking your team, came from today. And so when I was in college, I I went to Emory University, and I saw a poster advertising a speaker, Paul Loeb, and I was very involved in student activism. I was involved in a group that was working to end homelessness, and I was part of groups working on women's issues and diversity and um, multicultural issues and all kinds of things. Lots of things that now I would group under the category of really creating beloved community. This idea of creating a world where everybody belongs, where people are valued for who they are. So there was a poster on campus, and Paul Loeb was speaking. And I will say the main reason I went is because he was speaking about a book he had written. And there was a blurb from one of my heroes, Alice Walker, one of my favorite writers, saying, oh, if you must read this book, this is such an important book for our times. And I think that book must have been Hope in Hard Times. I have to confess, I didn't read the book, but I did go to the lecture, because I thought, well, if Alice Walker says that I should see this, then I should go. And so I ended up going to the lecture, being very inspired by what Paul had to say, and ended up, being a student who asked questions. I think along with some other students, ended up meeting him afterwards. And that really just led to, I think at the time Paul was working on a book about Generation X, and I ended up being interviewed for that book, and that really was just the start of a relationship where Paul started interviewing me about where I found my own motivation to be involved. At the time, I think Generation X had a bad reputation for being slackers, for not really caring about making a difference in the world, and so I think in part some of his work was about showing some different angles on young people who were very much interested in making positive change in the world. So I always say to people, each one of us has moments of wisdom and insight. We all say something smart sometimes, or something that's very wise. I just had the terrific good fortune to say something smart to someone who was an award-winning journalist and was writing a book. And so, you want to pick your moment. So luckily that moment where there's so many other times, right, where I could have said something that maybe was not sound so smart or inspiring. But luckily I had a good moment in that conversation and in subsequent conversations with Paul. So I ended up being included in his book about how ordinary people find the motivation to keep trying to make a better world. And a lot of that interview made it into a book called Soul of a Citizen, along with the stories of lots of other people. It's a wonderful book. Um, I'm not saying that because I'm in it. I'm myself just very inspired by the stories of other people who are in it. It's a great book for our time, even though it was written now about 20, maybe more than 20 years ago. And then another book that Paul did, The Impossible Will Take a Little While, which is an anthology of inspiring words from people, some famous, like Nelson Mandela and Maya Angelou, and people like, that we all know and love. Um, and then ordinary citizens who have sometimes said something inspiring, like yours truly. So um, that is really where this starts, this idea of you have to pick your team, because that's one of the things I said to Paul that made it into Soul of a Citizen, and that also made it into The Impossible Will Take a Little While. So I won't read all of this to you, but the basic idea here on the screen is you have to pick your team. Every day presents infinite reasons to believe that change can't happen, infinite reasons to give up. But I always tell myself, Sonya, you have to pick your team. And what I meant by that, for those of you who are, reading the quote, at the time, so remember, this is me, I'm in my early 20s, and I think now I would say maybe there are even more than two teams, but we'll stick with what I said then. Um, this idea that there there's this ongoing game in the world, um, and that there is a sense that there are some people who will always tell you that what you do can't really make a difference, that it doesn't matter, that things are just the way they are, and we have to learn to accept it and just do our best. And then there are other people, and these people come, from so many different races and cultures and times and points in history, who believe that we can make something different, who believe that we can make a world that's more just, that's kinder, that's more equitable, that have a sense of possibility, who don't just accept that things are bad and will always be bad, and we just have to do the best that we can for ourselves and get through it all. And so I felt like I had decided at that time in my life that I just wanted to be on that team of people who had a sense of possibility and hope, no matter the odds, no matter what the score looks like, um, that be a part of that team of people who just stay in that game, who stay in that game for making positive change. And so that's really where the theme of what we're talking about today comes from, because like many of you, I've been, um, filled with angst daily for what I see in the world, and just wanting to keep the faith, to stay on that team, to keep going, to keep having a sense of possibility and hope. So talking about this game and the team that I'm trying to be a part of, one of the first questions, of course, is why am I in this game? Why are you in this game? It becomes one of the essential questions that we have to ask ourselves in order to keep going. And this quote is also from Soul of a Citizen. And I just love this. A good society also helps each of us fulfill the bloom of our uniqueness, the acorn of our character. It honors our individual gifts and encourages our particular calling. And then skipping down a little bit later, a good society fosters community in all its forms. It nurtures rich and vibrant places to live where we are surrounded by friends and acquaintances, feel a sense of belonging, look out for each other's children, and know our perspectives are welcomed. Well, for me, not only is this a description of a good society, the kind of society I want to work toward and help build, but it's also a description of what positive psychology is about. Um, we, whether or not we think of ourselves as activists, as change makers, if we are interested in positive psychology in any way, it's typically because we share this vision. We believe that each of us comes into the world with individual gifts, with strengths that need to be nurtured and cultivated. I love that image that Paul says, the full bloom of our uniqueness. And so for me, when I was talking to Paul about picking your team, it was really before positive psychology had come into my life. But I realize in looking back at Soul of a Citizen why positive psychology has called to me so strongly, because I do very much believe in being a part of helping create this world where people are introduced to their strengths and helped to see the strengths in themselves and one another. And so that's really our theme today. And if you, Caroline, if you want to jump in and ask me questions, that's fine. Um, going to touch on just a couple of what I call a few rules of the game, and then we'll try and go through these quickly and then just talk about them and talk about what it inspires in you or what questions you have or even or insights or a wisdom that you might have to offer about any of this. So
Beautiful. I think exactly what you're talking about. It's a long game. I've heard that positive psychology is a long game. And I think what you're going to talk about is so is civil engagement.
yeah, yeah. So it's a long game. That is such an important phrase, but we forget it all the time. It's so easy to get discouraged because, when whatever we're fighting for in the moment does not come to fruition, whether it's a bill you wanted passed, the person you wanted elected, the change you wanted to see made, the effort you championed, it's really easy to lose hope. But it's really important for us to remember one of the reasons I think we lose hope so often is because we don't know enough about how change has actually happened in the past. And this is actually one of the themes that Paul goes back to in Soul of a Citizen quite a bit. So, for instance, taking the story of Rosa Parks. If we truly believe that Rosa Parks just one day was tired and just sat on a bus and decided, I'm not going to take it anymore, and then got arrested and everyone was inspired and said, let's have a boycott. And then they had a boycott, and then I don't know, maybe a few weeks later segregation was over. Then of course we get discouraged when we think that we aren't having that each action that we take has this momentous and instantaneous impact. And it's very important to know, because we aren't often taught the actual story of how long Rosa Parks was involved in the civil rights movement, how many, her husband had invited her, I think, to her first NAACP meeting 12 years before. She went to training, she went to meetings, she held roles like being the secretary of this organization and being on this committee and really studying about civil disobedience and going to trainings. And so this was not something that just happened in a moment of frustration where one person just all of a sudden decided to make a difference one day and had an instant impact. And so we have to look at how many of the people that we admire, many of them never even lived to see the success that they helped to cultivate. Susan B. Anthony never got to vote. Um, she worked for women's suffrage for years, but she did not live to vote. And so that is something that it's really important for us to remember in terms of staying energized for the game, that it's about endurance, and training ourselves for endurance. And this is a big part of paying attention to our strengths and strengthening ourselves for the journey, because it's not a sprint. It's definitely a long game. Caroline, I can't always, I know I see some people's, I see a hand raised, but I'm not always able to be aware of that when I'm sharing my screen with the slides. So I'll just count on.
Yeah, they were just
all.
wondering if they could, we'll send out a copy of the rules, and we
Oh,
will send
sure.
a recording and a copy as well.
Great.
And
Okay.
if you have questions, everyone, just put them in the chat, and then we'll take them as they go. And then, of course, if we have time in
Yeah.
the end. Yes.
And so rule number 2, don't give up in the middle of the game. And it's always the middle of the game. So again, we are part of it's really like a marathon. It's not only a marathon, it's a marathon relay. So we are never the first or last runner. We stand on the shoulders of people who did all they could when it was their turn. Um, and we will hand off that baton to others who will do all they can when it's their turn. And of course, whatever we're working for, the goal keeps changing as we grow in our awareness of what's possible, of human potential, as we grow as different people are empowered to come to the table and speak up for themselves and voice their own experiences. What a just and equitable world looks like, that definition is always changing. And so there are people who were forgotten or not represented in the civil rights movement in the 60s who are now very much a part of what we think of when we talk about building an equitable world now. And so it's really important to not think of this as something we're going to finish. It's, as some people say, it's not only a long game, it's an infinite game. But it's really important, just the same way when we're playing a game, you don't keep checking the score, looking over your shoulders. You kind of stay all in and do your best, and just use that faith and that trust to stay engaged, and know that you are already experiencing some wins and some victories that people before you could only imagine. That's always been very powerful to me. I remember as a girl, my grandparents were sharecroppers, and my mom, once we were coming back from a funeral in rural Georgia, a cousin's funeral, and my mom said, because she had grown up picking cotton, and she said we passed a field. And my mom said something like, "Oh my, look at all that cotton. Somebody's got a lot of work to do." And I was like, "Where? Where? Where?" And my mom, just paused for a moment and said, "Lord have mercy. I never thought I'd have a child who doesn't even know what cotton looks like." And so again, it's that perspective that we're not where we want to be. Of course we're not. But that we keep making advances. And the way that we do that in whatever type of justice or inequity that we are fighting for is really just to remember that the game keeps going. Picking your team, respecting the other team. I think that's something we really need to talk about and emphasize right now. Um, I've already explained to you, I think, in the opening sequence what I mean by picking your team, just deciding what is it, what's your vision of the world? What is it you want to create more of in the world? For me, it's definitely about having a world where people know that they have strengths. People's strengths are cultivated and encouraged. People are helped to see the strengths in one another. So that is my team. And looking to create spaces and environments and policies and organizations that cultivate the strengths in people. That's what's really important to me. But even as we pick our team, the game depends on respecting whoever you perceive to be the other team. And in fact, that is something that I think many of us uh, really feel missing in our current climate. Cultivate, how do we learn to disagree? How do we learn to still see good in one another so that we can work together on hard things and realize that we're never necessarily going to be in 100% agreement. That's just not the way things work. And I often turn to a quote from Parker Palmer, who is someone that I love and look to his work and his writings frequently. And he reminds us that when the Constitutional Convention was held, that there were only 39 delegates signed the final document. Not everybody agreed. Of the 55 delegates to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, only 39 signed. But yet here we are. Here we are with the Constitution, with here in this nation, still battling it out over things. And so it's important to know that the game goes on. You don't need 100% of people signing on. Uh, it's about staying in the game, picking your team, respecting the other team, going along with what the final decision, what the score is for that particular segment of the game, but then you stay in it and you keep going. But laying that foundation for that basic respect is something that is important for all of us. Finding your position, playing to your strengths. So when I was younger, I really thought this was about picking your team and that was enough. I thought that was the ultimate decision. But what I learned is that even after you pick your team, you've got to figure out what's your role on that team. And this is something that frightens many of us about getting involved in any type of movement for social change or any type of activism, is that we think everybody needs to do it the same way. I think sometimes that's our fear. We're like, I don't want to march, or I don't want to have a, sign, or I don't want to phone bank, or I don't want to knock on strangers' doors. And it's really important to know that there are so many roles, so many positions to play in creating a world, an equitable world. And so this is why, again, why you look back to your character strengths. To me, as a strengths coach, anytime you're talking about figuring out what you should do, you are talking about where can I contribute my strengths. And so that involves knowing your strengths and looking for ways to use those strengths. So whenever we are talking about what we should do, not only in terms of career or vocation, but even in a movement that we want to contribute to, then we are always talking about finding that place where we're going to be able to use our strengths in a way that's valuable to that effort. Because our strengths are the best of who we are and what we are. But again, when we're using our strengths, we're being energized. Using your strength energizes you. I love to cite a piece of research that talks about how feeling and experiencing a sense of calling or purpose is related to being able to use at least four of your character strengths, of your signature strengths. And so to me, that's amazing to have that number, to know that when we are in roles where we're getting to use at least four of those 5 to 7 top strengths that we have, that we're more likely to experience that sense of I'm where I'm supposed to be. This is my calling. I'm making a difference. Then that's really important information. And that's the kind of thing that helps us get involved in things and not burn out. Knowing that we need to find positions and roles that engage our signature strengths, that we need to help other people find roles that help them use their strengths instead of just feeling like there's one way to contribute. Again, core message that we find in positive psychology, making wise use of time outs. So if you're talking about staying in any kind of game, but especially a game for social change, um, for equity, for justice, then you're going to have to sit out sometimes. You can't necessarily play every inning or every quarter or whatever sports analogy that we're using. It's really going to be important to make wise use of timeouts, to know that sometimes you can't be the person who advances the action. Sometimes you need to meditate, to read, to journal, to connect with other people, to just be in nature. That these are the things that keep you going. They're not selfish because they're the things that keep you going to stay in this for the long haul, for the long game. When you play to your strengths, you always win. The beautiful thing about being strengths focused in what we do is that just being able to use our strengths helps us experience that sense of meaning and purpose and joy in our lives. And so it's not that outcomes don't matter. It's not that we are trying to say it doesn't, whatever happens, I don't care if the world ever gets better. I don't care if I, get this person elected or help this new um, policy, this anti-racist policy uh, come into fruition or come into play. We're not saying that outcomes don't matter, but what we are saying here when we're talking about playing to your strengths is that the experience in and of itself is meaningful. And there is a passage that I've been reading. I don't have the exact quote with me right now from Howard Zinn, historian, and he talks about his days working with SNCC and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Civil Rights Movement. And he talks about how it's not just about winning. And he talks about how years later, when he would get together with other people who were a part of that movement, they would talk about how terrible those days were, how frightening, you know, how oppressive. But then he says, you know, being in the movement together, we all agreed those were the best days of our lives. That sense of working on something important and meaningful with other people, the friendships, the depth of connection, working for values and principles that were so important, not only to themselves as individuals, but to creating a more just world, that in spite of all the hardship and the struggle, it was also, looking back, the most meaningful period of their lives. And so that's really important when we think about what we mean by winning. Of course, we want to win our policies, our candidates. We want to win. but we also need to think about how it's a win to live a life where you are taking action on your values and the things that you believe in. And so again, this is kind of the same thing here said in another way. Be in the game. To be in the game is its own reward, because one of the things that we talk about in positive psychology is the importance of living a life of meaning and purpose. And so to just be in this game and to know that you're doing things that make a difference, not only for people today, but for future generations, that is a reward. And I think oftentimes we actually don't talk enough about that as an aspect of well-being. We talk a lot about burning out, or what happens about being overwhelmed, but we forget to talk about the sheer joy of doing something that and being a part of a movement that means so much to you. And for most of the people that we admire and look up to as heroes, we realize that, again, they don't necessarily live to see all their wins, but their lives are so rich with purpose and meaning, and we admire them for that. We admire the way they keep going and working towards something that's so important. And so, last but not least, what I like to think of as a winning play is this idea of strengths keeping for the common good. Um, strengths keeping is a phrase that I've coined because I think it's important for us to remember that our strengths are not something that we do once, that we learn about once. We go to one workshop, we take an assessment, and then we forget about. That it has to be a practice like housekeeping, timekeeping, goal keeping, peacekeeping. It's the practice, the habits of helping people to recognize, remember, and make good use of the strengths within themselves and one another. And so we've already talked about how, we know that using our strengths has a proven impact on both our personal and collective well-being, our sense of resilience, our sense of agency, our ability to develop and maintain positive relationships with other people. So anything that can do that much good and have that much of a powerful impact on others is way too important to be left to chance. It's way too important to, so we don't want to just assume that people will discover their strengths and learn how to use them. We want to really make sure that we are helping that happen. I put together a quick list here. So when I talk about being a strengths keeper, um, I'm going to just skip to this part. Who can be a strengths keeper? And basically anyone. You don't need to be a positive psychology expert. You can be a teen, you can be a kid, you can be an adult. Anyone can take on this role of helping people identify their strengths, see strengths in one another, and make good use of their strengths. It's definitely a learn as you go role. But just a few ideas for how strengths keepers can help. And this is something you can decide to do today. You don't have to wait. But strengths keepers help people to see the good in one another, believe in their own capacity to make a difference. It's so important. So many of us don't even believe that we can impact things. Finding roles and projects in which people can use their strengths in ways that benefit their community. Cultivating a sense of meaning and purpose in their work. Tapping into their strengths to stay in the game and prevent burnout. Helping people to grow strengths-based habits and practices that build resilience and purpose. This one is a long one, but it's really important. Creating psychologically safe, authentic, brave relationships and spaces to talk about tough things, to do tough things together, like confront systemic racism and other forms of injustice and inequity, whether that is anti-Semitism, sexism, heterosexism. These are hard things, and anything that we can do to help people develop the kinds of relationships where they can still see the good in one another, find common ground to provide that foundation for talking about hard things is really important for the health of our community, for the health of our democracy, for the health of our families, our organizations. And last but not least, strengths keepers remind people of all of the above as often as needed, and it's always needed. So I think most of these other things I've said, somehow I've worked them in. So Caroline, I'm just going to stop. I will let people know that at allourstrengths.com, there is a resource. I've written all over mine, but there's a resource called How to Be a Strengths Keeper in 6 Simple Steps. And there's also a list of questions that people can use in connection with their strengths called Your Strengths in a Time of COVID-19 that can help you think about specific things to do with your specific character strengths. So I'll stop there because I know I've said a lot.
Wow, thank you so much. I'm just taking a moment to breathe in and digest what you've said, and it reminds me that,
I'll stop sharing too. Hold on just a
sure,
second. Well, maybe I will if I remember.
I can help you with that, I think.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Stop share. Thanks. Okay.
And let me just jump in there with you. So it just reminds me of what we're dealing with is our human nature,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Both the negative aspects of our human nature and the positive aspects of our human nature. And we're seeing in this political climate both as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? And one of the things that I think that you're talking about, and of course the brain has a negativity bias.
Sure.
Right? And strengths keeping seems to me to be a way to wrestle with both.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
To find common ground, but to also continually remind ourselves, wait a second, what is the aspect of my nature
Mm-hmm.
that I want to bring forward in this moment?
Yeah. So I remember there was the book, it was what Robert Fulghum, Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And I often say everything I need to know I learned from being a PTA president. And really for me, that is in part where this idea of strengths keeping evolved, because one of the things you learn pretty quickly is that people can have all the great ideas in the world, but if it's not someone's job, if there's no name on the sign-up sheet for that specific thing, it's not going to happen. And it doesn't matter how important it is, it's not happening unless someone is signed up for it. And so when we use that analogy and we think about the other important roles, like the treasurer takes care of the money and the secretary takes the minutes and the hospitality chair makes sure that there's refreshments. As a strengths coach, I said, well, who takes care of reminding people of their strengths? Who takes care of making sure that people are seeing the strengths in one another and finding a way to use their strengths in their roles so that they're energized by this, so that they're bringing their best, so that they're creative and resourceful, and so that they feel appreciated? And that's for me where this idea of strengths keeping started to evolve, because again, it has to be in a role and a practice. It's not something that we're human. We've got that natural negativity bias, right? And so it's really easy for us to see what's not working, what is frustrating. Our brains do a wonderful job of scanning for the bad to help keep us safe. And so we really need that extra help in our families, in our organizations, in our teams, in our society to help us see the good in one another and the good in ourselves.
I was just going to say that. Last question about, well, this seems like it only applies to certain people because I'm retired and not part of any group. But I had a conversation right before we got on the call with someone who said, when asked, how are you doing with COVID? And she said, well, thankfully, I really enjoy my own company.
Hmm.
And it's exactly what you were just about to say, which is that, are we strengths keeping with ourselves?
Yes.
We, because we have a gratitude challenge coming up. And one of
Hmm.
the things that we're talking about with gratitude is about that we're energetic beings. And
Yeah.
when we look at how we're managing our energy, which was what I think you're talking about with
Yeah.
strengths keeping,
Hmm.
is when I lean into my values, when
Hmm.
I lean into what is innately strong about
Yeah.
me, then I'm going to have the energy, the wherewithal to do what? How about get out of bed?
Yes.
How about, sometimes, I don't know about anybody else, but sometimes if I'm not managing my energy, that's a tough chore,
Yeah.
right? I've watched the news or I've gotten some news, and to get up and to feel that heaviness and then to have the strength to get up. How do I do that? Well, one of the ways to elevate mood is by leaning into our strengths, is by
Absolutely.
leaning into gratitude. And then I have the energy to carry on. So
Sure.
whether that's with myself or with a traditional group, or the group could even be my family, the group could even be, my animals that I
Yeah.
have in my house.
Yeah.
It could be again the larger community. It could be I was thinking of the metta kindness meditation. It
Yeah.
could be sending prayers and good wishes and energy to those that are in charge, even, right?
Sure. And I would love to speak to this idea about, the person who said, well, I'm retired. Um, it's not about being a part of any specific organization. We all thrive in community, but I think it's important for all of us to remember that we are a part of the world. And what I mean by that is that you're as real as any tree or any lake or river. You and your being are part of what makes up the world. And so as people encounter you, they are encountering it's the same way, you can walk down a hot, sunny street, and then there's a tree that offers shade, right? Um, or a stick or a rock that you stumble over. And so each of us is just as real as that tree or as that rock. And what I mean by that, the strengths that we put out shape other people's experience of the world. And that does not matter. It doesn't matter. Let me take that back. That does matter. But what I mean is, it doesn't matter if you're retired or in an organization or a child. We are always kind of co creating the world together at any given moment. And the strengths that we put out in the world very much impact how other people experience the world each day. Do they think it's
Mhm.
kind? Do you make people laugh? Do you help people be more careful because you have that strength of prudence? Do you help people have an experience of hospitality? So again, what we put out, who we are, even if we feel like, well, I'm not in an organization or I'm not in a movement, um, we are still helping create that world that other people are experiencing just by being who we are. And the more that we're intentional about our strengths, the more that we can create a positive experience of the world, not only for ourselves, but for other people.
Awesome. I had a request to read the quote that's behind you.
Oh yeah. So, oops, I knocked my camera. So this quote says, "May we who eat be bread for others. May we who drink pour out our love." And it was a hymn that I went to a friend's the christening for a friend's baby, and that was the hymn. That was a line from the hymn that they sang, and that child is now in college. But I decided that I want that on my dining room wall, and so I ended
Beautiful.
up painting that frame and getting it printed out, and um, because I do think again quote is very much about using our strengths and putting the best of ourselves out into the world for other people.
I was also thinking about in the certificate of positive psychology, we're talking about, I'm taking that program and we're talking about leadership and how sometimes leadership is about taking charge. And it's in
Mm,
reference to what you were talking about. And sometimes it's also about being led,
yeah.
right? And I
Hmm.
feel like in some ways, what's what's amazing about this time period right now, this unprecedented time period, is we're watching the democratic process
Yeah.
evolve.
Yeah.
And it's, we may not be pleased with it, we may not be, but it is working,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
is, there are steps and people are going through it. And we're getting a chance to watch it, we're getting a chance to wait, we're getting a chance to maybe worry, all those
Hmm.
W words, right? But in reality, what's happening in real time is we're watching our democratic process unfold.
Hmm.
And more to the point of what you were saying, how we view that, the conversations that we have, the way in which we participate, we are actually evolving. It's very reminds me of neuroplasticity in the brain.
Yes.
Like we are shaping it. It's
It's
not
not
that,
just for brains, it's for democracies, right?
right,
Hmm.
right. And that there are times to have that. This is like the liminal space where we, the known and the unknown, right?
Hmm.
We're going from the known into the unknown and into the known, but we don't know where we are yet. We don't know the
Yeah.
outcome. And the unknown is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's
Hmm.
uncomfortable. And what I
Absolutely.
loved about some of what you were talking about, which is that in the long game of social justice, in the long game of our political process, in some ways it feels like we're in the liminal space a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we may not know in our lifetime if the impact that we're having right now is really, we're going to see that. It's going to go into the known.
Right.
And so it really is about sustainability and
In the liminal space, we have this idea that we will all be in the liminal space at the same time. But going back to that idea that sometimes the meaning of our actions we cannot know. So, we don't actually know that our work or our efforts were successful. And so, again, going back to some people we have talked about who died before seeing their work rewarded or their efforts rewarded. Martin Luther King did not live to see the results of his efforts. And so I'm sure he felt like he lived in a liminal space. We, from where we sit, see the success and still some of the challenges and the really deep ongoing challenges that are still there in our society. But we can see someone's work as having been successful or their impact and forget about the fact that so many of the people that we admire don't get to see the meaning and the impact of their work.
mhm. What inspires you right now about our political process and about the situation we're in?
Oh, well, I'm inspired. Look at all the people voting. Look at all the vote counters and the door knockers and talk about a team sport. Seeing those people there for the poll workers. Again, it really is our job. And this is an aspect of strengths keeping. Um, or like how Mr. Rogers talked about look to the helpers. It really is our job to help keep directing people's attention back to what is working. All the things, all the time and energy that's being given to make this process work. People standing in line to vote. People, it's amazing. And so that always inspires me. I also try to challenge myself. This is where you can tap into the strength of humility, which is one I know we all can work on. And so I don't want to insist that I get this recognition and gratification from seeing the success of everything I do, when so many people who've done so much more have not had that opportunity. And so again, just finding some joy in meeting and meaning in just being one of the millions who passes the baton, who puts energy out there, who helps contribute. That's inspiring to me.
Well, you're inspiring to me. And I
Oh,
love what I have, and I don't know anybody else, if you want to raise your hands up to to acknowledge what I feel is just a wonderful presentation at a time when we're in the liminal space and we don't know what is next.
yeah.
And I also really appreciate very much your reference to that we're like as significant, we're a part of nature,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that
Mm-hmm.
like a tree or just in who we are,
Mm-hmm.
in our
Yeah.
beingness, right? And
Yeah.
I haven't thought of myself in that way, but it's
Mm,
really true. When I walk in nature, I appreciate the
yeah.
variety and the difference and the uniqueness of what I encounter. And back to that sense of being energy,
Yeah.
right? There is an exchange there. So I thank you for that perspective too, because I think it addresses Lois's question about what if I am just by myself? And
But
it's like,
think about, I just have to say, like watching some of the stories about people standing in long lines to vote. And then I would see some people post about how, well, in our line, someone ordered pizza or a marching band came or there was a DJ. And again, that's people creating an experience for other people, not because they're some important, policymaker, or it's just knowing that we are shaping the experience people have. You could just stand there and be like, standing in this long line to cast a vote probably won't make a difference. You know, to turning it into this experience of bonding and taking joy in civic engagement. And so remembering that we can do that for each other when we share our strengths, or just the idea that none of us actually knows if we're going to be the important county that sways an election. I say that as someone who's currently living in an important county, but who knew? You don't know. You don't know the impact of your actions. And so we just have to give in that spirit of sharing our strengths and creating that moment for each other.
well, I certainly feel uplifted by spending this time with you.
Thank
And
you for having me.
yes,
It
we'll have to
helped
have you
me
come
remember
back.
my strengths. I needed it too. I needed it
Yeah.
too. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to remind everybody that next week we have Amy Albert uh, giving us the COVID halftime report using positive psychology practices to keep going. And we also have tomorrow, we have Zen Tangle. And if you
ooh,
haven't tried Zen Tangling yet, I don't know if you've heard of that, Sonya. It's drawing, it's contemplative Zen doodling. And it's
ooh,
really, really fun. And I'm saying these things because we do want to manage our energy at this time.
yeah.
We want to be drinking water. We want to be sleeping. We want to be, Rick is going to be doing a program, Rick Prater, call with me on establishing rituals and routines, and how to do that better. This Sunday, if you want to jump into our Tai Chi and Qigong program, if you feel you need a little extra support, you can do that. And of course, we have Yaro's Jumpstart Your Energy, a 14-day gratitude challenge that starts November 11th. She's going to pop on the call on Thursday with me. We're going to turn the tables a little bit, and I'm a little nervous. Phoebe's going to interview me, and I'm going to do hope, which I think you must be one of your strengths. Tell me one of your strengths. Yes, because
It is. It
yes.
is.
I'm going to do a workshop on how do we embody hope, and we'll get our body moving for
Ooh,
about 20 minutes, and that's going to be my it's my final project for my certificate in positive psychology. So I'm going to experiment with you guys, and you can tell me if it works, right?
that sounds
Uh,
awesome.
yeah. So all that and more. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And we're going to. I think we have one more thing I wanted to put in the chat. I'm not sure if it's in there yet. And that's the Handel group is going to be coming with on how to have a difficult conversation. If you're interested in life coaching or that program, there's a link in the chat for that. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Sonya.
Thank you for having
Many
me.
blessings. All right. Take care.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.